I've cut all the joints here, and now I want to fit them. Some might like to fit each joint individually, but which I'll do, and some may like to fit it as they cut them, but I've got them all cut and we're ready to fit. Let's pick a corner. Well, we can start with A. I've got A right here. I've positioned it in the vise, and we've got A right there, and now we'll fit them down, just like so. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is it is tight initially. It should be tight, but there's a fine line between being tight and too tight. We don't want to split out the piece. So I'm going to tap this in, and I can feel it. If it's really tight, then it's just not going to go. So you can see, work that down. That's good and tight. There, that's just what we want right there. I also want to check it's tight right there, but I also want to make sure that it's tight along this baseline, and it is. Now, as we fit these, one thing you want to keep in mind is I don't want to fit D next, because then we wouldn't be able to fit C and B. You'd have to spread it apart like that. So the next one to fit is B. So we're going to fit that in like this. And you can even position this in the vise like this. One thing you can do as well is you can knock A apart and then fit B, but we'll just fit it in like this. So again, just put it in. This is a little on the looser side, but I think it's still going to work. Yeah, no gaps, which is what we want. Now, you can see we've got a little gap right there, and that could be due to the fact that it just needs to be hit with a bigger hammer, which it did close up. So if you do have a gap along this baseline right here, if you do have a gap along this baseline, you can fix that. If you've got a gap right in here, chances are you can't fix that. So, but this can be fixed. Let me explain that. Let me go ahead and knock this apart so we can talk about that. And you notice how I've knocked it apart. I haven't taken it in my hand, and I haven't taken it like this and tried to pull it apart, because every time I wiggle this like this, it's going to compress the fibers and make the joint looser. So you'll notice I put it like this, and then I just take my hammer and knock it down this way. So if there was a gap along this baseline, one thing you can do is you can take your square and you can test it with the square on the inside. So I take my square, I put it on the inside like this, and I bring it down, and I look to see if there's a gap right there. Now, if there's a gap, if there was, there's not on this one, but if there was a gap there, it would be one of two things. It would either be that the middle is high, that there's some junk there in the middle, and it's high, or that this back edge here is high. Okay, so again, if there was a gap right there between the blade of the square and this outside edge, then that would mean that the back would be high, or there would be some junk. The junk in the middle I can look at visually and see. You could even turn it around like this, and if the square hit, then you would know that it was high right back there. If it didn't hit, then you would know that it'd be hitting on some junk in the middle. So at any rate, you want to lower, if there was a gap right here on this outer part, you'd want to lower this part right here. And I can do that simply by taking my square and my knife. Again, I'm not going to do it on this because it's tight, but I can take my knife and my square and just take it and just take a little bit off on that inside edge, thus lowering that. Use the knife and the square, then come back with your chisel and just chisel that, lowering this, and that would allow you to be able to bring this down, and it would be tight on the outside. So that's one way to resolve a gap along the baseline. Let's go back into fitting here. So we know that this one here is B, and it goes on like this. If you're going to hit this, just be careful right there. Now, another common problem that I see when fitting a dovetail is I see both gaps along the baseline, but then gaps in the actual tails. And one thing that you want to be cautious of is, well, you want to make sure that this cut is perfectly straight right there. Because if this cut is off at an angle, so suppose that this cut right up here was wider, right down here at the base, when I marked this and I cut it, it would be tight right initially as soon as it went in. But then as I knocked it in, this being smaller right here at the top would cause a gap. That's why it's absolutely essential that this cut is perfectly straight right there. Now this is going in nicely. If I want to take this off, I can just put my thumbs right there and pull back with my fingers. I'm going to test this joint because this joint seems to be a little bit on the tight side. I'd rather it be a little bit tight than loose, but I don't want it too tight. Now that seems a little tight. Let's see where the problem can be. What could be hitting? Well, I can see, let's take it off. I can see there's some junk right down inside there, and I think that may be one thing that's holding this up. Let's look at this other corner, and you can see, oh, there might be something in here. Let's turn this around. I might trim just a little bit right in this area. So I'm going to trim right in there and just a little bit right there. And I'm going to look maybe and trim just a little bit right there and a little bit right there as well. So let's go to the trimming of this. I like to trim this working straight down on top. So I'm just going to come in just like this, and I'm just cleaning up that corner, getting all the junk out of that corner. And then maybe just a little bit right there. Let's put this upright in the vise and trim this. Again, slicing it. You see how I'm slicing this to the side? So my hand is braced up against the edge, and I'm slicing this against the side just like this. There we go. Now let's test it again and see how close we're looking. One common mistake is for people to think that the joint is too tight and then start paring it away. I really don't like to pare. You've got to be really careful when you're paring because you can actually make the joint too loose. This pine actually compresses some, so there is a little bit of a fudge factor, if you will, in the pine. This feels like it's going to go in nicely just by removing that little bit. Let's get both of these in together. That's going to work nicely. Again, one thing I want to be cautious of is that I don't get it too tight and it splits right there. If it does, it's not a big problem. That's what a little bit of glue and sawdust was made for. So nice and tight there, goes together. And there we have it. Now that I've got the box dry fit together, you always want to dry fit your projects prior to gluing up. Now that I've got it dry fit together, I'm going to take it back apart and talk about some of the different techniques for preparing the inside prior to gluing up, and then we'll go ahead and glue it up. So when we take this box apart, you want to be careful. I've got my thumbs right here pulling straight up on it. Again, right there. This is a little tighter, so I may need to use my mallet. And you can even use a piece of scrap wood here and just work it straight down like this. And you can see we've got that coming up. And this one is tight, but we got it. So we've got that. You'll also notice that I've cleared the bench off, and this is something that's quite important to do prior to gluing up. The last thing you want to do when you're gluing up is looking for a tool or looking for moving a tool out of the way or tripping over the top of a tool. What I'm going to do before I glue up here is I want to prepare the inside surface. There's a couple ways you can do that. I actually pre-prepared some of this stock by hand planing it prior to doing any joinery, and that's something that's optional. You can do that if you want. In this case, if I was to hand plane this surface, I would want to make sure that I'm comfortable with the plane. The plane's not set too deep. It's easy to mess up the joinery with the plane. Let's go over to the tail vise and we'll just do a little short demo on planing the inside. Again, I'm not really worried about the outside at this point. We'll do the outside after the glue has dried. This is a number 4.5 plane, and we'll talk about setting and using the plane in our other video series. When I'm using the plane, what I'm doing here is I'm working just from this point and stopping right here. I don't want to work over the top of the dovetail, so you can even start like this and work it along. The plane is set very, very shallow. So we're just working it, and you'll see I'll start here and then lift up before going off the edge. So there we go. And again, if you're not comfortable with the plane, you can simply take a piece of sandpaper. I've got a piece of 220 sandpaper here, wrap it around a piece of wood like this, and sand with the grain. Again, remember, this is the inside of the box. Don't fret about the inside of the box. Not very many people are going to be concerned with the inside, so you can just even sand the surfaces like this. This is especially difficult here where it's shorter. Again, very important, don't go over the top of the dovetails. You'll round it over, especially with sandpaper. You'll round that over. So I'm keeping for certain that I am in between the dovetails there, just cleaning that up. Same way here. And then I'll go ahead and sand this. Oftentimes when I'm building a piece, I will, even though I have used the hand plane, maybe a scraper, any sort of cutting tool, I want to bring a consistent scratch pattern to all of the surfaces, and that's why I like to use the 220 sandpaper is about the coarsest I'll go, to bring an even scratch pattern, a consistent scratch pattern to all of the surfaces. So we've done this just on the inside. The outside we'll do after the glue is dry and the box is ready to prepare the outside. Let's go ahead and start gluing this thing up. I'm going to remove the dust. And we'll lay all this out. In order to glue, we're going to need a few things. Obviously some glue is helpful. I like just a Titebond original yellow glue. Works great. Some cauls. What is a caul? A caul actually helps distribute the clamping pressure. And you'll see its use here in a moment, but it is cut to the height of the box, and that will help distribute the clamping pressure. We need 4 cauls, and they're just cut out of scrap pieces of wood. And a couple clamps here. We've got a couple of these bar clamps. Our assembly hammer, and last but not least, good old popsicle stick. Makes for spreading the glue nicely. You can pick up 1,000 of those fairly cheaply, and that'll last a lifetime. Okay, so now we are ready to glue this. Let's just position these. I've got A, B, C, and D. Make sure the bench is clean. We've got A, B, and C, and D. Just like that. Again, I'm going to start with corner A, then I'm going to go to corner B. And we'll glue A, B, and then we'll glue C and D on like this. I like to put the glue on the pins here. It's easier to get it in there. We'll just put the glue down in the bottom of the pins, just like this. Using the popsicle stick, you can drag it up from the bottom, up on the sides, just like this. And all of the surfaces that are going to touch, we want to coat those surfaces. If you work quickly, you don't have to put glue on both surfaces. If you're working a little slower, you may have to put glue on both surfaces, but I usually just do it on one surface. Now we're knocking that together. It's also important that you work quickly because the glue is actually will swell the wood, which might be to your advantage. Now we're just going to take this and spread the glue right there. And then put this on. Flip this over. I've got a little glue. I tend to get a little glue crazy and put too much glue on there. But I'd rather too much than too little. There we go. Making sure that the letters line up. Oh, let's put it like this so you can see that. There we go. We got to turn this around and put this on. If you need a little bit more open time, you can try using white glue. It works great and gives you a little more open time than the yellow glue. Make sure that these are nice and tight all the way down. You'll notice what I'm doing here is I'm hitting right over the top of the joint using the softer mallet here. Right over the top, right there, bringing that together nice and tight. So now what we'll do is we'll take the cawls and position them right back here behind the joint. The reason why I'm behind the joint is because this joint is sticking through just slightly. If I put it over the top, I'm not going to have that clamping action. So we've got it right behind the joint. Now we're going to come in, as I mentioned, that cawl helps distribute the clamping pressure. So you can see we'll just bring this back like this and bring it up as close as you can behind that joint. You'll notice that I have the clamp in the center right here. And we'll just squeeze that together. Not too tight. Bring this around. Again, the clamp is in the center here. Not up here at the top, not up here, but down in the center. That also helps distribute that clamping pressure. Okay, generally I like to position the clamps going in the same direction. It's just less cumbersome. There we go. And then I oftentimes will check to see if it's square. If I did the joiner correctly, it should be square, although sometimes the clamps can tend to pull it out of square. And a little trick for that is just measuring from corner to corner. So you can just take your tape measure and measure from this corner, and I get 12.5, and then this corner is 12.5. Now suppose that one was longer. Say it was longer in this direction. I would have to just take hand pressure and push in that direction. That shortens that measurement and lengthens that measurement. Of course, we want the measurements to be the same. Let's do a final inspection on the box. You'll notice that what I have not done is taken any of the glue off on the inside. I don't mind even taking my finger and wiping it on the outside, but if I start smearing the glue on the inside, it's going to be difficult to take that off. Well, I could use maybe a wet rag and wipe it off. Problem with introducing moisture here is that will make the glue thinner, and it's going to tend to soak into the fibers, and if you were to stain the inside of the box, it would show up. So what I recommend you do, if you can, wait about an hour or so. Let the glue get a little rubbery, then you can take a sharp chisel and peel the glue away. If you can't wait an hour, if you are leaving this overnight and you come back the next morning and the glue is hard, you can still come back carefully with a chisel and cut away the glue. So one final inspection. I see here on corner D that there is a little bit of a gap, and I can pull that this way with a clamp. So let's do that. Let's just put a clamp this way, pulling that together, and we should be able to pull just that little gap out of there. I'm going to just take this. I don't need a cawl necessarily because I'm working just in one small area, and I'm just trying to pull that together just in that area. So we're just going to pull that, and I can see that the gap has just about disappeared. Okay, well, we'll let this dry while we move on to shaping the top and the bottom with a hand plane.